Over the course of the forum, we are celebrating the importance of the Great Lakes from a social, an economic, and an environmental perspective. Our next speaker is Mark Matson, founder and president of the Ontario Waterkeeper, who will help us to celebrate the environmental importance of the lakes. After 10 years in the courtroom as an environmental lawyer, just wanted to have a look at him. He's survived that experience. Mark founded Lake Ontario Waterkeeper in 2001. The mission of the Lake Ontario Waterkeeper is to help create a swimmable, drinkable, fishable future by connecting and empowering people to stop pollution, protect human health, and restore habitat. Mark sits on the board of directors of 4 waterkeeper organizations in the United States and Canada, and is a member of the International Joint Commission's Great Lakes Water Quality Board. Welcome, Mark.
That's my prop. Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Linda, for giving me this great opportunity to speak here today. I think what I have to say is fairly hopeful. Obviously, given how many of you have traveled and come here from all 8 states, 2 provinces, our 2 great countries, it really is a sign of a renewed interest in the Great Lakes, and I think it's something that everyone who spent any time here yesterday, today, or tomorrow can take home with them, that there is a community of people who are coming together and really prepared to represent, protect, and fight for this Great Lakes, to take it from what we might have heard in the past, the fair, good Great Lakes, back to the Great Lakes. And I think that's really the importance of why we're all here. I want to, it's true, I've been an environmental lawyer since 1989, and I was in private practice. And in 2001, I gave up my practice of law to become a full-time waterkeeper, and I'm the Lake Ontario Waterkeeper. And I think what's interesting is 2 major questions have always come up as the Lake Ontario Waterkeeper. The first question that we get over and over again is, can I swim in the lakes? That question isn't that difficult to answer. In fact, our organization put together what's called a swim guide, and we took the data, the public health data for over 900 beaches on the Great Lakes, and we've done it across North America and Canada, Mexico, and now into New Zealand. And it's very easy. You can get that data and put it up and collect it and aggregate it and give people for free an idea of their beach, their public beach, the place they go, and give them an idea of what the E. coli, the bacteria, levels are. They get an idea by following it. When it rains, they can see if it goes up and down. They can see if it's a problem all the time. They can get an idea of how to fix that. And with that information, they can empower their communities and build again that access and that nexus to the Great Lakes that is the gateway, recreational water, to the next generation of leaders. So the swim guide was very easy. But the second question is much more difficult. And it was the topic yesterday morning here when we started talking about the state of the Great Lakes. That is the central issue here yesterday, and I think many of you are here to hear about how we're doing. And that question is, are the Great Lakes getting better or worse? And I'm going to tell you just a bit about my story, but I think just before I do, just to keep in mind, there are so many success stories on the Great Lakes, and we've heard of them. Of course, the osprey, the bald eagle, and many of the other fish-eating birds like the cormorant, terns, they've all been coming back on the Great Lakes. And we know of the money that's being spent on cleanups. In Port Hope, for example, of the nuclear contamination there's $1.2 billion been allocated to clean up that town. And just this summer, in July, the first shovels went into the ground. We've heard about the Randall Reef. We know even here in Toronto, Bluffers Beach was once one of the most polluted beaches, and the community got behind it, and now it's one of the cleanest beaches in Toronto. And we know about those successes, but we also know that there are people on the Great Lakes who to say things are getting better would be an insult. For example, the people of Toledo. Could you imagine a Great Lakes city of 500,000 people having their drinking water system shut down for 3 days? And the impact, the lasting impact that leaves on their economies, on their real estate, and on the future of those communities, or Point Pelee. And so, and even here in Toronto, sometimes I hear a lot about the Toronto Bay, and is it getting better or worse? And for many of us, you know, it's a battle when we get that question. Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Well, what about our story? So I'd like to speak to each and every one of you about this, and I'm going to speak about it, just my story, and then maybe about how to answer this question most effectively. And that is, it's your answer that really matters. Where you live, what you do, and what your relationship is to the Great Lakes that really counts. Are the Great Lakes getting better or worse? So this little picture here, this comes from our Watermark project. It's at the end of the hall. We're collecting people's stories. We believe that those people who understand their water bodies also understand their watermarks. They left a lasting impression on them. And those stories about whatever it is, those uses, those beneficial uses, oftentimes they're about fishing or swimming. There are all kinds of stories, and we have thousands of them now. But my story started, this is in 1973 on Wolf Island. And my family has been in the same cottage, and it is today, on Wolf Island. All of the Great Lakes waters wash by Brophy's Point. We've been there since 1868 in the same cottage, so I see all the old fishing rods, the old docks. At this time in 1973, for example, it was an Easter on a Sunday, and I had gone to church, so I'm in my nice clothes. And it was a very wet year, and the grasslands were flooded, and this fish, a bowfin, came up into the grass, and I had never seen it before, so I'm quite thrilled to have it in my hands here. But to think about where I was in 1973, nuclear power was new. There weren't nuclear power waste sites in Darlington, in Pickering, in Bruce, and they weren't loaded with the waste of the past 30, 35 years. And the promises at the time were that if there were waste at those sites, they'd be dealt with. And today, they're still not dealt with. They're still looking for where to put those wastes. And those plants hadn't operated. And the Great Lakes, for all intents and purposes, were almost nuclear free. And we know now, this year alone, with the DGR and what happened up in Lake Huron, that people are very concerned about this issue. And at this time, as a young child, I didn't know anything about that. There were balls of eels out in front of our cottage, balls of them, because the American eel lives in Lake Ontario for 20 years, and the seaway had only been built in the late 50s. So here's about 12, 13 years in, I'm standing on the Great Lakes, and most of the eels hadn't been affected. They didn't even know the seaway had built or the dams had gone in. So we would see all kinds of eels at night, and we'd go out there, and there were many fishermen who were catching them and making a living off them. And in fact, on Saturdays, I would go to the bay just beside here and work with the commercial fishermen to pull in the nets. And they were selling the large channel catfish and carp to the markets. And from my point of view, the Great Lakes were this amazing, amazing place. People had commercial fisheries. There was all kinds of fish. They were clean. But at the same time, this is just after 1972. And we all know what happened between 70 and 72, and we were hearing about the burning of the Cuyahoga. We were hearing about mercury contamination in Grassy Narrows for the first time, hearing that fish can actually be contaminated by pollutants. We knew about the laws, barely. I was 12, 13 years old. They were coming into force, putting in place the Fisheries Act, putting in place the EPA Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act in the States. And all these things were happening, and we're sort of oblivious to it. But now I stand here in 2016, and I just think of all that's changed. In 1982, when I was at Queen's, I always wanted to go and be near the water. 1982, when I was at Queen's University, we had always driven in the winter on the ice to Wolf Island. We had done it since I could remember, and and the pictures on the walls, it went back 100 years. In 1982, a family went through the ice in January, and the city of Kingston banned that activity forward. And since that time, no one would even think you could drive to Wolf Island on the ice. There are some years where there's no ice at all. The pictures on the walls of the horse racing in the winter, of all the activities that went on in the bay, Those don't happen anymore. Wolf Island now has an artificial ice rink. In the 1990s, the zebra mussels came along in the late 80s and 90s, and by that time I was a lawyer working at Osler's here, a corporate lawyer, and then went into criminal law. But, you know, we started thinking, are these good or bad? But boy, did they change the lakes. Did they change what took place? Because here, most of the times, I would catch perch and rock bass and smallmouth bass. We would catch more fish. You couldn't put a worm in the water without catching a fish. And of course, with the zebra mussels, they cleaned up the water dramatically, and the sun got through, and things changed. The fish went deeper. The perch fishery is gone now in Lake Ontario and around the Wolf Island, Prince Edward County area, and you wonder what happened. If it was good or was it bad? And we look to places like the IJC. Is this good or is this bad? I then became an environmental lawyer. I started prosecuting landfills, did investigations. I worked for the Ministry of Environment a bit as a part-time contractor prosecutor with a man named Doug Chapman. And we did prosecutions, and we went to the areas of concern. We went into Hamilton. Linda Lukasik, who started Environment Hamilton, was the informant in a case against the city of Hamilton for a landfill. We went here into Toronto in Kingsmill Park. We went into Belleville. We worked on sites there. We went into Kingston. Janet Fletcher was the informant there. And the courts were enforcing the laws, and we started looking at these landfills thinking, geez, everyone's saying things are getting better, but these landfills are leaking. We made a difference. And then the sewage. I became a waterkeeper. I was counsel at Walkerton, but I became a waterkeeper really because in 2001, there were all these plastics washing up on the shore. We had never seen plastics back when this young man was around. They were everywhere. We knew about water glass, but now there are things like condoms and tampon applicators and even needles floating up on the shore. And I felt as though, you know, despite what we were hearing, that things were getting so much better, they weren't getting better for the people in Wolf Island. They weren't getting better for the people I grew up with. And so we took some action on sewage. And we were quite successful. Kingston made one of the biggest public investments of their history, more than the concert arena that the Tragical Hip played in recently, which was $40 million, $70, $80 million to improve their sewage treatment plant. And we're still working on those issues, and we're still making a difference. But why I say all this is because each and every one of you have your own history, your own perspective of where you live. And from that place where you stand, are the Great Lakes more important and getting more involved? Are you getting more involved in the Great Lakes? Is it getting better for you and for your community? Because that's the answer that everybody here wants to hear about. And that's the answer that's going to bring really us all to the point why we're here, because we're looking to the future. We're wondering, you know, is there an urgency to our work? Are things getting better, and if we just go home and don't do anything about it, is everything taken care of? Or is this a crucial time? And are our actions, do they matter today? And will they dictate the future of whether things get better or not on the Great Lakes? I believe they will. So from my point of view, things like microplastic, microbeads, fibers, getting into our drinking water, into our water, pipelines, changing from natural gas pipelines to bitumen and running throughout our Great Lakes. The issue with nuclear power, and what are we going to do with the waste? Where are we going to bury it? Are we going to build new reactors or not? Climate change, fisheries. What about the American eel? Are we just going to ignore the disappearance of the American eel, which once represented 50% of the biomass of Lake Ontario and truly was the iconic fish of this lake? And of course, water diversions. These things hang over us today. And so when we think about the state of the Great Lakes, and we think about, are they getting better or worse, and people ask us that question all the time, just remember, it's your answer that I truly believe matters most. And that's what's going to empower you and charge you and make you care and make you all become leaders. And I think so many of you here today, each and every one of you are leaders across the Great Lakes, and I applaud you. And I hope that your voice and your experiences truly come to make a difference in the future and make the Great Lakes great again. So thank you very much for having me here today.